All right, let's jump right into this. Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're unpacking a truly incredible piece of ancient history that actually has some profoundly deep implications for how we live and build today. We're going to be looking at an era of unprecedented wealth, a brilliant geopolitical masterstroke, and a hidden legacy that literally changed the ancient world.
Let's kick things off with a staggering number, 450 talents of gold. Now, to put that into perspective, we are talking about an astronomical amount of wealth. We mean literally tons of gold, all delivered directly to King Solomon from a single, highly strategic trade expedition. It was exactly the kind of wealth that defined an absolute golden age for ancient Israel.
But, this raises a really fascinating question. How exactly did Solomon pull this off? How did one ancient port city change 3,000 years of history and unlock this kind of unprecedented global wealth? Well, to understand how Solomon achieved this unimaginable success, we have to look really closely at a brilliant geopolitical move that's hidden right there in the biblical text.
Section 1. Chronicles New Perspective. If you dive into the historical texts, you'll notice a massive contrast right away. If you've read the Book of Kings, you know it heavily highlights Solomon's flaws, specifically how his marriages to foreign women brought idolatry into Israel. But Chronicles, it completely shifts the lens. It deliberately leaves out those massive flaws and instead shines a huge spotlight on his achievements, his temple building, and the sheer vast scale of his prosperous kingdom.
Now, you might be thinking, did they just forget about all his mess-ups? No way. Not at all. As we see in the book of Nehemiah, the returning exiles of that era were acutely aware of Solomon's monumental mistakes. Nehemiah explicitly used Solomon as a cautionary tale, reminding the people that even a king who was uniquely loved by God fell into sin because of foreign influences. So they knew the dark side of their history perfectly well.
So here is the million-dollar question. If everybody already knew about these massive failures, why did the author of Chronicles choose to selectively focus only on the grand achievements? Well, it was entirely about the audience. You see, Chronicles was written for a broken community returning from Babylonian exile. For over 50 years, their homeland was ruined, occupied by others. They came back to absolutely nothing. No walls, no temple, no economy. The author highlighted the positive milestones of David and Solomon to offer desperate people some much-needed hope and to give them a blueprint for rebuilding.
Moving on to Section 2, the difference sea routes make.
To really get the magnitude of what Solomon built, we need a quick lesson in geography. Even today, landlocked nations struggle immensely from an economic standpoint. Without direct access to the sea, everything you import or export requires super expensive air freight, or you're paying heavy transit fees to neighboring countries. It's a closed loop. On the flip side, nations that control strategic maritime bottlenecks, they hold the keys to global economic power. They get global access, lower trade costs, and incredible wealth generation.
Just think about how this plays out in the modern world. Take the Suez Canal in Egypt, linking the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean, or the Panama Canal, bridging the Pacific and Atlantic. Control over these specific, narrow waterways dictates global trade. Countries literally fight over these bottlenecks. And this exact principle of maritime leverage brings us directly to Israel's geographical advantage back in Solomon's day.
Section 3. Solomon's Strategy, Ezion-Geber.
There's this single, monumental verse in 2 Chronicles 8:17. It casually mentions, "Then Solomon went to Ezion-Geber and to Elath on the seashore in the land of Edom." Now, that isn't just a travel itinerary. This verse reveals Solomon's strategic masterstroke to secure a very specific location far to the south of traditional Israelite territory.
And the impact of grabbing this spot? It was absolutely massive. Ezion-Geber sat right on the Gulf of Aqaba. By securing this port, Solomon bypassed those incredibly slow, expensive land routes and opened a direct maritime highway to East Africa, Arabia, and Asia. In fact, modern Israel still uses this exact same geographical advantage today through the port city of Eilat. Solomon effectively turned Israel into a two-ocean power, generating that unbelievable wealth we talked about at the very beginning.
Which brings us to Section 4, the hidden helpers of success.
We always tend to idolize the individual, right? The solo genius. So it's totally fair to ask, did Solomon achieve this golden age entirely on his own? Was he just a solitary mastermind who willed this maritime empire into existence? Actually, when we look closer at the text, we see that this massive economic victory was a highly collaborative, multi-generational effort. It really happened in a series of steps. Step 1. King David, Solomon's father, actually did the heavy lifting of conquering the territory of Edom years prior.
Step 2, Solomon utilized that conquered land to build the port of Ezion-Geber. But here's the catch, Solomon didn't have a navy. So, Step 3, he relied on the maritime expertise of an ally, King Hiram of Tyre. Hiram was a Phoenician king, and his people were master sailors. They actually built the ships and navigated these new, uncharted southern waters. Solomon was quite literally standing on the shoulders of his father and his allies.
The text proves this partnership perfectly. In 2 Chronicles 8:18, it notes that Hiram sent him ships, and his servants sailed with Solomon's men, bringing back that staggering 450 talents of gold. King Hiram wanted in on this incredibly lucrative new trade route so badly that he likely transported materials or even whole ships over land just to launch from Solomon's new southern port. It was a wildly successful joint venture.
And finally, Section 5, a port for the next generation.
This whole historical account was sending a really profound message to those impoverished returning exiles. It was basically saying, hey, you may feel like you have absolutely nothing right now, but you have what your ancestors built. It reminded them that just as Solomon utilized the geographical foundation his father David laid in Edom, their current struggles in the rubble weren't starting from scratch. They were building upon a historical and spiritual foundation that had actually survived the exile.
So the absolutely crucial takeaway here is that God uses one generation's faithfulness as the literal launchpad for the next. A single person's seemingly isolated victory, like Solomon launching a massive trade fleet, is almost always the fruit of the previous generation's unseen labor, their battles and their prayers.
To kind of bring this home and see how it looks today, our source material highlights a great modern example, Bethel Church. Today, this community stands on a 48-year history. But that reality, it was built entirely on the unseen sacrifices and prayers of early immigrants who started with literally nothing. Just as we benefit today from the devotion of those who came before us, our hidden, faithful, everyday efforts right now are quietly constructing a spiritual port for our children.
Which brings us to the end of this explainer. And I want to leave you with a thought to really chew on today. Are you building a spiritual Ezion-Geber for the next generation? What foundations, what small victories, and what quiet sacrifices are you laying down today that will allow the generation coming after you to launch their ships into a wider, deeper ocean? Really think about it. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.